Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Punishment and Reward of Kali, text number 40. Amuni Pancha Stanani Hi Adharma Prabhava Kali Otarayena Datani Niyavasat Tat Nideshakrit Amuni Panchastanani Yadharma Pravakali Altarayena Datani Niyavasat Tanideshakrit Amuni, all those. Pancha, 5. Stanani, places. He, certainly. Adharma, irreligious principles. Prabhava, encouraging. Kali, the age of Kali. Autarena, by the son of Uttara. Datani, delivered. Yavasat, dwelt. Tat, by him. Nideshakrit. Thus the translation purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Thus the personality of Kali, by the directions of Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, was allowed to live in those 5 places. Purport, thus the age of Kali began with gold standardization, and therefore falsity, intoxication, animal slaughter, and prostitution are rampant all over the world, and the saner section is eager to drive out corruption. The counteracting process is suggested above, and everyone can take advantage of this suggestion. Text 41. Ataitanina seveta bubushu purusha kvachit niveshato dharma shilo rajaloka patir guru. Therefore, whoever desires progressive well-being, especially kings, religionists, public leaders, Brahmins, and sannyasis, should never come in contact with the 4 above-mentioned irreligious principles. Purport, the Brahmins are the religious preceptors for all other castes, and the sannyasis are the spiritual masters for all the castes and orders of society. So also the king and the public leaders who are responsible for the material welfare of all people. Progressive religionists and those who are responsible human beings, or those who do not want to spoil their valuable human lives, should refrain from all the principles of irreligiosity, especially illicit connection with women. If a Brahmin is not truthful, all his claims as a Brahmin at once become null and void. If a sannyasi is illicitly connected with women, all his claims as a sannyasi at once become false. Similarly, if the king and the public leader are unnecessarily proud or habituated to drinking and smoking, certainly they become disqualified to discharge public welfare activities. Truthfulness is the basic principle for all religions. The 4 leaders of the human society, namely the sannyasis, the Brahmin, the king, and the public leader, must be tested crucially by their character and qualification. Before one can be accepted as a spiritual master or material master of society, he must be tested by the above-mentioned criteria of character. Such public leaders may be less qualified in academic qualifications, but it is necessary primarily that they be free from the contamination of the 4 disqualifications, namely gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter. Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prasthaya Budaya Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Bhajarne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskatya De Siddharne. The 4 regular principles are fundamental to Krishna consciousness. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Shadavan labhate jnanam tatpara samatendriyaha jnana labdva paramashantim achere nadigachati. That a faithful person who's absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses, he quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. In other words, Krishna consciousness is not simply an intellectual exercise or armchair speculation. Its basis is practical activities. Practical activities means jitendriya. Jitendriya means jita, indriya, one who is able to conquer over the senses. Unless one can conquer over the senses, there is no possibility of making any progress in spiritual life, nor is there any possibility of making any factual progress in real material life either. Rupa Goswami said, Vacha vegam, manasakroda vegam, jiva vegam, udarapasta vegam, etan vegam, yovisha etadira, sarvam apimam prativim sashishat. That a sober person who, this sober means dhira. This word is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna says, dhiryas tatra namuyati. That a sober person is one who's not bewildered by all the different changes that go around him, even the change of his body at the time of death. In the material world, one is always bewildered by all these different changes. Changes mean that we're always hankering for what we don't have and lamenting over what we lost. So, hankering for the future and lamenting over the past, this is material existence. If one wants to come to spiritual existence, one has to become purified of these hankering and lamenting. Hankering and lamenting means the modes of ignorance and passion. Tadara jastamo bhava, kama loba dayaschaye, cheta eta anavidam, stitam sattve prasidati. That if one wants to make progress, then he has to get free from loba and kama, greed and lustiness, krodha, anger, or as Krishna says, trividam narakasyedam dwaram nasanam asanaha. Kama krodha stata lobas tasmat etad tyayam tyajet. That there are three gates leading down to hell: lust, anger, and greed. And every sane person, he should try to become free from them, because they lead to the degradation of the soul. That a person who tries to get free from these three gates to hell, he does good for his self-realization, unless he gradually attains the supreme perfection. And to get free from these gates to hell, the Vedas prescribe so many different rules and regulations. Therefore, Krishna says, Yakshastrim vidim usrija karya karya vyavyastita. Yakshastrim vidim usrija vartate karakarata. Nasasidim avapnoti na sukham na param gatim. That a person who thinks that to gratify my senses is very nice and unrestrictedly does so, he can never have peace or happiness nor make any progress towards the supreme destination. Therefore, one should try to learn how to become dhira, and dhira means one who is not bewildered under any material circumstance. The real dhira, he's prasanatma, as Krishna says, Brahma bhuta prasanatma, nishoshiti nakankshati samak sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim lavate param. Because he's above the bodily concept of life, he has no anxiety. Therefore he's prasanatma, he's joyful. He doesn't lament or desire to have anything, and he can treat everyone equally because he has nothing to gain or lose from anyone. And he becomes qualified to understand what is real devotional service. The aim of Krishna consciousness movement is to gradually progress one from the stage of an adhira to the stage of a dhira. One who can control his senses to one who becomes controller of his senses by engaging them in the service of Krishna. Rupa Goswami says, Vacha vegam. So the first sense to engage, of course, is the sense of speaking. And vacha vegam, manasakroda, of course, according to this verse, manasakroda vegam. Actually, it says, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayo. The first sense that Maharaj Ambrish engaged in Krishna's service was the mind. Because unless the mind is engaged in Krishna's service, then the mind will engage the soul in material service. Unless one has some intelligence, then the senses and mind will take over and direct the soul. Even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Dhyayato vishayam pumsam, sangat steshu pajayate, sangat sanjayate kama, kama krodo bajayate. That a person is too much absorbed in sense gratification, he loses his intelligence. And as soon as he loses his intelligence, as soon as he sees things simply from a material point of view, then at once he becomes engaged in materialistic sense gratification, materialistic activities, and he goes to hell. Therefore, lust, anger, greed, they gradually take away one's intelligence and force one to perform so many sinful activities that bring one down to the lowest platforms of material existence. Asram yonim apana, muda janmani, mama prapyaiva kondiya, tato yant yadamam gatim. Krishna says that those who are not following the path are called asuras. And what happens to the asuras, that by performing demonic activities, they gradually go down to take lower and lower species of life. So one who thinks that this idea is nice, this Krishna consciousness movement is not meant for such persons, because they won't get the opportunity to take a dog or a cat body in the next lifetime. So if they want to go through again the 8 million species, they should try to avoid the Krishna consciousness movement, because it might interfere with their plans. Those who don't want to engage their minds in Krishna, they should avoid hearing about Krishna, because as soon as one hears about Krishna, one's mind may, there's some possibility, as long as one stays awake, actually pick up something about Krishna. Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunana Vardhane. So Maharaj Ambrish first of all engaged his mind in hearing about Krishna. Then he engaged Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunana Vardhane. Then he engaged his tongue in hearing about, speaking about Krishna. So when Rupa Goswami, he says, Vacha Vegam, Manasakroda Vegam, that the first thing to engage is the speaking, but unless one hears something about Krishna, then it's not possible to say anything about Krishna. So it's implied when we say speaking about Krishna that we've already heard something about Krishna. So after hearing something about Krishna, then as we hear, Atakshi Krishna Namadi Nabraved Grayam Indriyai Sevan Mukhe Hi Jivado. So in the beginning we engage our tongue. And we hear that the tongue is the most voracious and difficult to control. So one who has not heard about Krishna, maybe you should stand up. One who's not heard about Krishna, then he simply talks prajalpa. He talks so many different things. And Prabhupada said, just like in India they say a ghostly haunted person, he talks so much nonsense. And many people in the West are also ghostly haunted. Sometimes, I don't know, here in Amsterdam, probably. But in New York, you can walk down the street and find so many people talking to themselves. Carrying on long, you find that here too? They don't usually get into arguments with themselves, but it depends how many people they have living with them. So a ghostly haunted person, he talks all kinds of nonsense. And the conditioned soul, who's in the bodily concept of life, he's ghostly haunted. Therefore he talks all kinds of nonsense. For instance, if one goes on book distribution, one will find that the only thing that people can understand and relate to generally are how many children they have. You say, how many children do you have? And they go, I have 3 children. You go, wow, you got a nice family there. And you go, yeah, I know. And what kind of work you do? Well, I'm a sweeper in the street. Wow, you must be really clean. That's what we're trying to introduce, cleanliness. And they go, yeah, I know. Or they go, I'm a housewife. You go, wow, a domestic engineer. My mother's one of those too. So these are things that people can understand because more or less they're ghostly haunted. All their intelligence about anything higher subject has been taken away. And they're quite absorbed in these topics, these categories. How my body looks, how many children I have, what kind of work I do. This is, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, this is all in the mode of ignorance. Those who are in the mode of ignorance, they think that they can only think of one kind of work as being all in all. And their knowledge is very meager. So because their intelligence has been taken away and they're in the mode of ignorance, they can't understand things, and their topics of conversation are very limited. There's very few people you can introduce. If you say you're not your body, people can't understand at all what you're talking about. Then they think, well, maybe I'm my mind. That's how they... Even in these New Age books, they say, you're not your body, you're the spirit. So people's idea of the spirit is their mind. My mind is divine. Whatever it tells me to do, it's nice. When they say, do your own thing, they really refer to do the thing that your mind tells you. Become faithfully surrendered to your mind. Don't listen to anyone else's mind. Your mind is divine. So, if one can engage his tongue in speaking about Krishna, and he speaks all kinds of nonsense, then his mind becomes more and more absorbed in material concepts of life. And then he wants to vachavegam, manasakroda vegam. Then he becomes frustrated, jiva vegam, and he wants to eat more and more all kinds of whatever he can get a hold of. Nobody likes me, everyone hates me, I'm just going to go and eat some sweet balls. That's for the devotees. They have that same saying here. Nobody likes me, everyone hates me, I'm going to eat some worms. That's in English. They don't have that here. But that's frustration. Then as soon as one becomes frustrated, there appears to be no sweetness in life, then one wants to engage the tongue in getting some sweetness out of food. So what is the sweetness of food? The sweetness of food really is this taste of lording it over another living entity. That I can't control anyone. My wife, she doesn't surrender to me. My children, they don't take me very seriously. My boss, he always lords it over me. And even my dog, he growls at me when he sees me. And the fish in my tank, they swim the other way. So I can't control anyone here. Therefore, at least this cauliflower and this carrot, they're paying full dandavats, ready to enter into me, surrendered completely. And therefore I'm inspired by accepting their surrender and letting them become one with me. So this eating is actually just the taste of lording it over another living entity. And nowadays, of course, people are very proud because they think they're controlling the whole world. You know, some bananas flown in from Santo Domingo, and they think actually we're controlling a little part of the banana plantations now in Santo Domingo, and they're flying in things all over the world just to surrender to my tongue, to surrender to me. I'm enjoying, today I'm enjoying Santo Domingo, and just like we had some feast in Mayapur, and that before they were announcing, these are the ingredients from the kachoris. They were flown in from our temple in Bangalore, and the ingredients for the chutney came in from Brazil. And so of course we think we're an international movement. This is all Krishna's mercy. But the materialist thinks I'm controlling the whole world now. The whole world is surrendered to me and I'm enjoying it. So, for the materialist, what he really wants to taste is blood. Not only people aren't satisfied, a banana surrendering to me, I want to devour everyone. So I want to taste some blood, the blood of a living entity. So this is for the really staunch materialist, and therefore his tongue is engaged in, more or less, in animal slaughter. And from there, jiva vegam, udara pasta vegam. And then the stomach grinds it up in order to strengthen the genitals. So when the genital is really strong, and one thinks that actually he's the master of the whole world and he can really lord it over the material world now. Distribute his mercy everywhere. It says that for instance, in America, there was a famous group of explorers who went all around America and they supposedly discovered America. I forget their names. Lewis and Clark were their names. I don't know if you study about American history. But there was this band of explorers. They went over, they went through what's called the Louisiana Territory at that time, which was owned by the French, which was like 1/3 of America. So in the American historical eyes, that they were actually, coming across savages, people who, did dances to bring about rain, believed in demigods, they followed principles, they actually believed that, they actually had rituals they followed, etc., etc. They didn't unnecessarily kill animals. They were savages. They didn't exploit the land. So these uncultured persons, in the eyes of the Americans, they were discovered by Lewis and Clark, who went through Louisiana. And later on, of course, the French sold Louisiana, that whole territory, 1/3 of America, to the Americans. But on their way through, it was discovered that they had venereal disease, and practically all the Indian villages they went through, they all contacted venereal disease by the enlightening power of Lewis and Clark. They spread Western civilization into the Indian villages. Civilized them. So, this idea that this is Western culture, it's not really culture, it's just another branch of real animal life, actual animal life. So, Udarapastave, Etan Vegam Yovasheheta Dira. So here, this is divided up into different types of personalities. And it says that those who are material leaders, at least they shouldn't smoke or kill animals. Because if one can't control his tongue, then he's not going to be able to control anything else either. And if he can't control his tongue, then he'll speak all kinds of nonsense, he'll engage in all kinds of illicit activities. And what is the purpose of his being a leader? What is the purpose of being a leader is to actually see that the citizens are making some progress towards liberation. Otherwise, there's no need for materialistic leaders who are simply interested in exploiting their followers. So anyone who can't control his tongue, his interest is something other than protecting the citizens. One time the devotees were running for office in America, and there was one devotee, Balavantapuru, he was running for the mayor of Atlanta. So during the race for mayor of Atlanta, there was a TV debate. So the person who was the lieutenant governor, I think, or something, he was one of the major candidates. He later on won the election. He was giving his speech. And so later on in Balavanta, he stood up and said that this candidate, he said during his speech, we noticed that he was smoking a cigarette. He said that everyone knows that cigarette smoking is dangerous for your health. It's advertised. So if this person can't even control his own senses enough to stop doing something which is dangerous for himself, then how can he expect that he's going to be able to protect the citizens of the city? Of course, this person won the race, but because people are so full. But later on, this idea were taken up in the presidential race by another person who lived in the same state. His name was Carter. He actually took this as the platform, part of his platform. But the basic principle is that if the leaders can't control their tongue, then they won't be able to control anything else, but to speak of the citizens of the state, by any fair way. And the Brahmins, as it says here, they're supposed to be truthful. That a Brahmin is supposed to be someone, or a teacher, who sees things properly. But if a Brahmin is not truthful, then how can he see anything properly? In other words, Brahmin is one who's supposed to have a higher standard of truthfulness. Truthfulness means that what he says is actually the correct thing. So the materialistic leaders, they have to not smoke, Prabhupada says here. They shouldn't eat animals. So they have to control their jiva, their tongue. They have to eat the right things and not engage their tongue in illicit activities. And the Brahmins, they're supposed to control their tongue also, their vacha, their speaking power. And the sannyasis are supposed to be able to control their genitals. And Prabhupada gives us an order that the Brahmins are the spiritual master of the whole castes, and the sannyasis are above them, and the materialistic leaders, they're more or less, just like the Kshatriyas, they're supposed to control the Vaishyas and the Shudras. And the Brahmins are supposed to control the Kshatriyas, and the Kshatriyas are supposed to be the Brahmins, they're led by the sannyasis. Therefore, one should be put in particular position according to one's ability to control his senses. The minimum to be any authority at all, in any way, is that one has to eat prasadam and talk about Krishna. Or at least not engage in one should eat at least prasadam. One should be a vegetarian. Otherwise, one's claims to be any kind of authority is all bogus. If one can't control his tongue, he won't be able to control anything else, or properly lead anything else. As it says, Nite vidu swartikatim hi Vishnu, darashaya ye var artamanina. That people don't know that the aim of life is to obtain Krishna, therefore they take something else that's insignificant, artamanina, is very important. So generally people take sense gratification is the most important thing. Sense gratification, the basic principle is eating. Because unless one can eat, there's very little sense gratification. Try and fast for a few days and see how much you're inspired to do anything else. So eating is the basic principle of sense gratification, of lording it over the material nature. It's the first principle, as I said, to lord it over a carrot or a potato, or for the meat eaters to lord it over, a cow, or of course nowadays they have alligator. If you can eat an alligator, then that's a man. That's a real man. You go to some restaurant, pay 500 guilders for an alligator steak. And if you go to the sophisticated stores, at least in America, I'm sure here also, you can buy chocolate-covered caterpillars, chocolate-covered ants, all kinds of, or the most expensive thing is caviar. Everyone knows what caviar is, right? fish eggs. Tiny little fish eggs. In any case, the idea is that jiva do, that the tongue is the basic principle of enjoying the material world. And if one can gratify the tongue, then the other senses become strong. So the second thing is the speaking. So as soon as one begins to gratify his tongue, then he gets the whole philosophy. Just like we can see in certain religions that their philosophy is that Jesus Christ said that thou shalt not murder. It was embarrassing when Jesus Christ said thou shalt not kill. He didn't understand. He should have said thou shalt not murder, because those who are actually enlightened, they've reached a conclusion. Because they've concluded that Jesus Christ, he must have ate meat. Otherwise, how could he be our leader? Therefore, he must have meant murder. Because if we say thou shalt not kill, then he must have been a hypocrite. Because if he was eating meat, thou shalt not kill means that he was doing something he said we shouldn't do. Therefore, they changed it. He really meant thou shalt not murder. You can kill a few people, but not too many. In other words, now they have to figure out what thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder, people above the age of 25 who are doing, a lot of work. As far as a child, well, they're not really a human being in the womb. Therefore, if you kill them, you're not really killing a person. So, with that philosophy, of course, someone who doesn't pass his test in arithmetic, he's not really a person. So, if you kill him, you're not really killing a person. So there's no end to the speculation. One who's interested in gratifying his senses, he can come up with any kind of philosophy. And of course, then he tries to spread it to everyone else. So he can't control his tongue. There's no question of truthfulness. It's not that people who are in Maya ever consider that my conception of life is simply based upon my own personal lifestyle. Just like the scientist, he's a drunkard, he beats his wife, he even kicks his dog once in a while. Not very often. His dog is his only friend. But still, this is the person who is enlightened, knows everything, who's going to discover the absolute truth, how the material world works. He's depressed, he's a chain smoker, etc. But he's the enlightened seeker. So, such a person is supposed to lead others into the path of light from darkness. So we can understand that actually these persons, they have no higher consciousness. They're bewildered by the illusory energy, and yet they're taken as some kind of authority. But real authority is a person who actually has some philosophy, who doesn't speak all kinds of nonsense, begins with someone who actually has his philosophy based upon sense control. In other words, if anything is valuable to be spoken, to be learned about, it'll be obtained when one is able to control his own senses and see beyond the bewilderment that he's under. So that begins with controlling the tongue. So if one controls the tongue, then he has something to speak about, something worthwhile. Of course, our philosophy is controlling the tongue, begins with taking Krishna prasadam. And then then it says the Brahmin, he has to be at least speaking about reality. Otherwise, what is the purpose of speaking if we have no idea what is real and what is not real? And the sannyasi, after speaking about reality and after controlling the tongue, then one learns how to control all the other senses, and especially the genitals. Because if one doesn't control the genitals, then there's no question of arising above the material energy, the material consciousness. It's like Prabhupada writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that generally householders, they don't make any progress in spiritual life. So of course it sounds like, wow, I just got married, I just no more progress in spiritual life. No, the reason why householders generally don't make any progress in spiritual life is that they generally don't follow the four regular principles. And therefore, by not following the four regular principles, they can't really control their mind and senses. Their whole consciousness diminishes, and they can't control anything. They just spend the rest of the time trying to control each other. Unsuccessfully. Then they get divorced and try and find someone else to control. So one who's able to control all the senses, that's called sannyas. And the devotees, they're supposed to be sannyasis. Nyasitya karma palam, karya karma karotiya, so sannyasitra yogi ja niragnirna chakriya. One who's unattached to the fruits of his work, and works as he is obligated, is the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no work. So one who engages all his senses in the service of Krishna, he's known to be a sannyasi. Sannyas is not simply putting on a different dress. It says in Kali Yuga, if someone gets a sacred thread, then in India it costs 5 paise, unless you buy a whole punch. And if you can get a discount, pass them out to your friends. It's not by simply wearing some sacred thread that one becomes a Brahmin. Sometimes in India you may get the good fortune of getting a rickshaw ride. And at the end of the rickshaw ride, your rickshaw driver pulls out his sacred thread. He hasn't washed, since the last 5 years or something. It's darkened the ground. He's riding his rickshaw on. And he says, Swamiji, I am Brahmin. Namaste. So it is not simply a question of having some 5 paise sacred thread. It is, or just like sannyas is not a question of dress. It is a question of utilizing all the senses in Krishna's service, using everything in Krishna's service, including all the senses. Then one is actually sannyas or sannyasi. And such a person, his consciousness becomes elevated, and he knows how to direct others towards liberation also. He becomes qualified to know what is the real path of life. And one who's controlled by his senses and mind, then he's in darkness himself. He has no conception of the difference between himself and his body, or who God is. He's completely in darkness. He's going down to the animal species, and if anyone follows him, they'll go down to the animal species along with him. So it is the duty of our society to understand what the connection is between our activities and, for instance, these 4 regular principles. It's not that we take these vow, the 4 regular principles, and the vow is simply to torture us and so we feel bad all the time. Krishna has given us something to feel guilty about, not where he keeps us under his thumb. But these are, Krishna says, raga dvesha vimuktayistu, vishayan indriyas charan, atma vaishara videyatma prasadam adhigachati. He says that by following these regular principles of freedom, every person could become free from all attachment and aversion and obtain the full mercy of the Lord. So the idea of following these principles, by following regular principles, then one becomes free from all ignorance and passion, all attachment and aversion, and he comes to the position where Krishna can give fully his mercy. And one becomes enlightened in Krishna consciousness and goes back to the spiritual world. So the whole idea is to get out of our miserable condition and to go back to the spiritual world, of which these 4 regular principles are meant to help us come to that transcendental platform. And anyone who's going to be a preacher or take some responsibility, they're able to help their dependents as much as they understand and follow or fully engage their senses in Krishna's service, of which automatically they become clean, truthful, austere, merciful, and they're able to do some good for themselves and good for others. But those who are engaged in these four sinful activities, they become the opposite. By illicit sex, cleanliness is destroyed. By meat eating, sometimes they say mercy and sometimes they say austerity. By meat eating, austerity and mercy are destroyed. By mental speculation, truthfulness is destroyed, or gambling. And by intoxication, we take austerity or mercy is destroyed. So by these sinful activities, all the good qualities are destroyed, and when simply his consciousness goes down, 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 he becomes more and more identified with his body and with his mind, and more prone to lord over the material nature and exploit it for one's own personal sense gratification. So to think I'm a good person, I'm doing the right thing, and to engage in these sinful activities means that one is simply deluded by ignorance. He won't be able to help himself or anyone else. And one who follows these four principles completely by engaging his senses in Krishna's service, then he's able to help himself and others and gradually make progress towards the supreme goal. So, thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
You mentioned about someone who doesn't come to devotional life, something like that. He can fall back in or go back to the 8 million, through the 8 million form path. If you fall down in spiritual, you go through the same 8 million form path, till you come to the human form. So if you don't take not to devotional life, you can fall back again and go all the way again.
Yeah, sure, you will.
Which is a few births. I thought always this is speculation also. Maybe a few births then.
No, you go back for millions of years back into the animals or grass or plants or insects. I mean, look around. See how many blades of grass there are. So a lot of people, they didn't make it. There are a lot more ants than there are people in Amsterdam. And they were persons with a similar philosophy that you had. But they were surprised. Yeah.
Is it correct that in the beginning of spiritual life, stress is more based on positive activities, like singing, dancing, taking a shower, and eating also, but then later the stress is more based on controlling also eating with gladness and modeling?
Yeah, of course. That's always like that. The people just came and they said, if you eat too much, if our philosophy was, you're eating too much, you're going to hell, etc., etc. If we just preached like that, then no one would ever become attracted. So first, yena tena prakarena mana Krishna niveshaya. So somehow or another, Rupa Goswami says, engage people in thinking about Krishna, and then later on introduce the rules and regulations. But there's a point when the rules and regulations should be introduced. Not that one is, like as the example one devotee gave, when you're 2 years old and, or 1 year old and you're trying to learn how to walk, everyone tries to help you out. Everyone gives you the thumb, and if you fall down, they never, they don't say anything. But when you're like 45 years old, if you're trying to figure out how to walk, then people get on your case, You should have learned already. So at the beginning, when one comes to Krishna consciousness, certain rules and regulations are not really stressed very much, and one is simply encouraged to somehow or another participate. But if one is in the movement for 5-10 years, then at that time some other things are stressed. Not that, Prabhupada said that a new devotee should eat so much prasadam till he waddles like a duck. Well, I'm practically a new devotee in my conception. I'm just like a baby. So I should just, the only thing that will save me is I'll eat like a duck, till I waddle like a duck. No, at some point one should become more serious. I don't know if that answers your question.